You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Before we get started, remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and click the bell to get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Also, the podcast is now available on Anchor, Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. Joining me on today's cricket discussion is a former first-class cricketer and performance psychologist. After playing 14 first-class and 5 List A matches for South Australia, he decided to retire from cricket to pursue a career as a performance psychologist. His career as a performance psychologist has seen him coach Olympic gold medalists, Test cricketers, and executive teams of international corporations. He is the best-selling author of 5 books, which include Think One Team, High Performance Leadership, and First Be Nimble. In his latest book, Mindful Cricket, he brings together his passion for performance psychology and cricket to challenge and equip cricketers and coaches to find better ways to play a sport which everyone knows is played above the shoulders. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Graham Winter. Graham, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much.
It's great to have you here, Graham, to talk about your cricketing career, first of all, but also your psychology career, and also your book, Mindful Cricket, which has some very helpful tips for many cricketers to improve their mindset. So we're going to get that into our chat today when we're going to cover all those topics later on in our chat. But let's get into it, Graham. As I do with all my guests that I've interviewed on the podcast, I'd like to take them back to when they first got started into cricket, and it's been very fascinating listening to people's memories on how they got started in cricket. So, Graham, let's go back to the very beginning. Growing up in Adelaide, what are your memories of playing cricket, and who were some of your cricketing idols growing up?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question to reflect back, isn't it, on those very early days. I actually remember our next door neighbours had a very large garage wall, and I spent hours and hours and hours bowling balls against that wall and hitting the ball back, and then sitting around at night and creating scorecards of test matches that I would play, and then annoying my dad when he'd come home from work. So they were the early memories. I can't remember not running around with a ball and a bat. I can remember practicing fielding by throwing a ball against the back step, hitting the top of the step, and it pinging up over the main door, which had stained glass in it, and smashing it while my mother was standing underneath it. So, early memories were very much about playing cricket, and then playing with the local kids at the Oval and those sort of things. And then, probably first school game was probably about 10 or 11, I guess, when I played my first game for a school.
Yeah, I think everyone can relate to that, being in the backyard and playing cricket like that. I can. I used to be in the backyard for hours and wouldn't go in until it went dark in the evening. So, that's what sport does and cricket does as well. It just hooks you, doesn't it? And
it does.
It becomes an obsession.
It does hook you. And I think, as you say, you also get hooked by the personalities. You just asked about those, who do I recall? I mean, growing up, I'm going to date myself here. The first test match my dad took me to was in the 1960s, South Africa playing Australia at Adelaide Oval, and Graham Pollock made 180 and Eddie Barlow made 200, and Australia got completely blown away by a very good South African team. But I also used to spend a lot of time down at Adelaide Oval, watching Les Favell and Ian Chappell, and Gary Sobers was playing for South Australia at that time. Jeff Hammond was the sort of the sort of tearaway young fast bowler at that stage, and then I guess through the sort of teenage years, people like Dennis Lilly started to come into the fore, and Australia sort of entered a period. I mean, just as I suppose I was sort of heading towards secondary school and then into club cricket. That's when Australia were really strong. So the Thompsons and the Lillys of this world were dominating, and the Chappells and Doug Walters and players like that. So great era for cricket and great personalities.
Oh, absolutely. Especially Lilly, Thompson, Rod Marsh, the Chappell brothers. It was just a great Australian team in the 70s and early 80s. So, Graham, you finally got the call up to play for South Australia in 1978-79 to make your list A debut. Who told you the news that you were in the team, and what are your memories from that day? I know it's a long way back, but can you recall what you can remember?
Back in those days, you used to pick up the newspaper and find out. Used to find out you've been dropped exactly the same way. So, yeah. And that list A game, I didn't play Shield game for a couple of years, but that was a one-day game that we played in Brisbane. We hadn't played a match on turf because of the weather in South Australia, and we went up to the Gabba and faced Jeff Thompson, who was bowling a million miles an hour on the Gabba, which at that stage still had the dog track around it. I think we were bowled out for about 120, and it was pre-helmets. So, quite an experience. But, I think it's probably, I suppose, just one of those sort of reminders that there's quite a big step up from one level to another, and particularly at the start of a season as well, when you're facing sort of one of the best fast bowlers in the world. So, but yeah, all great experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, as you said, you make your first class debut for South Australia a few years after, in 1981-82. What are your memories from that day when you made your first class debut?
I played in Western Australia. Was playing for South Australia against Western Australia. From a personal point of view, it was just amazing. Just something that I had, I guess, on the list of goals that I absolutely wanted to achieve as a kid, was to play first class cricket. And I suppose, to me, it was, you needed to play a 4-day game to really be playing first class cricket. I played a few one-dayers, and there were no T20s in those days. I guess John Inverarity gave me some great advice before the game. He just just remember that you're a good club cricketer. That's why you got picked. And everybody else you're playing against is a good club cricketer. It was good advice because I think there were only 2 players in the Western Australian team that hadn't played for Australia in the previous 12 months. So the bowling lineup, I think, was Alderman, Lilly, Malone, Clark or something. And then the batting lineup was Hughes and Wood and Laird and Sargent and Marsh and so on. So, I had a good day. I got 5 in the first innings, and it was just a really amazing experience to take wickets in your first game and realise that the stuff that worked in district cricket actually works at that level as well. If you bowl an outswinger and it pitches in the right spot and it goes late, the best batsmen nick it, and the good thing is the best slip fielders catch it too. So I think one advantage of first class cricket, the guys can catch.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very important. Everyone's got to capitalize on those half chances and take their catches. As the old saying goes, in cricket, catches win matches. It's a cliche, but it's true.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was pretty fortunate in those days. We had, I think we had David Hooks, Jeff Crow, and Wayne Phillips were the sort of slippers, and they were pretty damn good. So you didn't see catches get dropped too often. And Kevin Wright was our keeper, and Wrighty was very good, very very good keeper as well. So yes, I know, but yeah, it was very it was fantastic to just have that opportunity, and also just, I guess, that sense of I can play at this level. That was a nice reminder, which is what Invers had basically said at the start.
Yeah. So then you decided to retire from cricket after playing 14 first-class matches and 5 List A matches to go and study psychology. So, Graham, why did you retire from cricket, and why did you go down the psychology route?
I had studied psych at uni, and in order to finish off my qualifications, I needed to get workplace experience, and you go through in those days you'd go through a 2-year supervision program, so you needed to commit pretty strongly. I'd been offered a role with Coopers and Lybrand, who was an international management consulting firm, to work in their organisational psychology area, and it was just impossible to try and play first class cricket and do the sort of training that was required, and also to do that. So I actually retired twice. I played all the games in the year we won the Sheffield Shield, which was 82. I retired after that to do the Coopers and Lybrand bit. the partners in charge at Coopers and Eyebrown then at the end of the following year then said, look, we're happy for you to go back and play state cricket. And I remember sort of saying to them, well, that's an interesting thought, but somebody did actually have to pick me again. So I did actually make myself available a game in, I think it was the 84-85 season, I think. And I got picked in the second half of the season and played each of the games in the second half. And then we won the one day, the McDonald, what was then called the McDonald's Cup. But as fate would have it, I had got registered as a psychologist by that stage, and I got an offer from the South Australian Sports Institute, which basically said, would you like to help us set up a sports psychology unit at the Institute of Sport? It meant leaving the management consulting area, but it also required that I gave up cricket. So I then retired again. So I didn't just retire once after 14 games, I retired twice. So, but yeah, zero regrets. It was absolutely the best thing to do, to then have a remarkable opportunity over the last sort of 35, 40 years to work with some of the best athletes on the planet, and also some of the sort of large corporations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Graham, everyone has mentors that they look up to and ask for advice and guidance throughout their life and anything really. Who were some of your mentors in your cricketing career and in your career as a psychologist? Anyone you've considered to be a mentor?
I mean, probably the person who had the greatest shaping influence on me was Chester Bennett. He was initially a teacher at Prince Alfred College, and he'd coached the PAC First 11 with a remarkable, just a ridiculous number of first-class cricketers that came out of the program that he looked after there. I mean, the last, I think it might have been I think I played 3 years in the First 11 there. It was the first year I played there. Of the first 7 batters in the team, 6 of us went on and played first-class cricket. So you can imagine we didn't lose too many games. But Chester was just a wonderful gentleman, just an absolute gentleman, a brilliant teacher, just one of those coaches who was very gentle, very quiet, but very clear. And he just got the best out of me. I mean, including identifying that me as a batsman and a rather poor off-break bowler at about age 14. And I was mucking around the nets one day, and he just came over and he said, "I want you to bowl that stuff. Get rid of the spin." And it was me bowling these swinging deliveries. I can't remember. It was, I either took 6 for 4 and 4 for 2, or 4 for 2 and 6 for 4 in the next 2 weeks. And within 2 years, I was opening the bowling for the South Australian under-19s, and so that was a massive breakthrough. But then Chester ultimately went on and coached Adelaide University, and so I had the opportunity to captain Adelaide Uni while he was the coach there as well. So he just had a massive influence on me in so many ways. And I think once I got into playing first-class cricket, David Hooks was the same age as me, and we played under-19s together. I think when Hooksy was appointed as state captain, I was an extremely strong supporter of him being put into that role, and I think his sort of confidence and I think that played a really important role. I think John Inverarity was a wonderful sort of guide through that sort of era as well. And then I suppose extending on in the sports psychology area, and I was very fortunate when I first started. Jeff Bond, who'd set up the sports psych unit at the Institute of Sport, was there, and Jeff and John Crampton, who was at New South Wales, were always wonderful sort of guides and reference points to me when I was involved with the Sports Institute initially, and ultimately with the Olympic team. And I guess just to have continued working in the corporate area, I've been really fortunate to work with some incredible chief executives of corporations and vice chancellors of universities and so on. So I feel myself incredibly fortunate to have learned a lot more from my clients than they've learned from me. So very grateful for a lot of opportunities and some really wonderful people that have helped to mentor me through that.
Absolutely. When you reflect on your cricketing career and your psychology career, what are you most proud of the most, and do you have any regrets?
The regret would be that I never made a century, and I terribly underperformed as a batsman. I made a couple of 90s and made a few 50s in Shield cricket, but really never focused on my batting as well as I should have, because back to first 11, I used to win both batting and bowling trophies at that stage. So I was probably a better batter than I was a bowler. But most proud of, look, I think the fact that I've played first-class cricket, because that's what I wanted to set about to do. I was very proud of the decision that I made to then focus on my career as a psych, and also the way I went about doing that, which I've been able to do that while also having a family and making sure that the sort of balance of that was how I wanted it to be. So, yeah, and I think there's a few other things from a career perspective that, a couple of the books that I've written that I'm particularly proud of as well. But I guess there's maybe another way of putting it, that there's nothing I've done that I'm ashamed of. I feel that, I've given it my best shot.
Yeah, that's all you can do in life. Just give it a crack and who knows what you can achieve.
Yeah, I think so. I'm literally just an hour ago was just doing some counselling work with an executive in an Australian organisation that have been doing it pretty tough through the COVID era. We're just having exactly that conversation with her around just helping her to just appreciate who she is and trying to be the best that she can be in her own unique way, rather than trying to necessarily follow what others think she should do or might want to do. And that doesn't mean that you don't take on the perspectives of others, but I think it's that ability to be yourself, I think, is such an important point, and one I know we'll talk about from the cricket perspective as well, that you don't want cricketers that are copying everybody else. You want them to learn from others, but to bring it into their game and how they operate.
Yeah, absolutely. Now that's the talking about yourself bit done, Graham. Let's get into this cricket discussion. I chose some topics to talk about and discuss in this discussion. The first one, Graham, of this discussion is we're going to be talking about sports psychology and the role it plays in sport today. Graham, many athletes have said that working with the sports psychologist has helped them to perform better in their chosen sport. There are more and more sports psychologists within sporting teams and sporting organizations to help their players and athletes perform at their best and get the rewards for all the hard work and success on the sporting field. Graham, first of all, can you tell us, what does a sports psychologist actually do within a sporting team or organization? And how has sports psychology evolved and changed since you began working in sports psychology?
If I take the last one first. When I first started, as I mentioned, Jeff was at the AIS and John Crampton was in New South Wales. That was it. There were only two sports psychologists pretty much working in the country in practitioner roles with some of the universities. But that's expanded enormously, so that now AFL and state cricket teams and netball and basketball and so on will mostly have some sort of access. And I think also the sports psych role, we used to pretty much play almost the three roles. You had the sort of psychologist dealing with sort of psychological issues, if you like. You were then the counsellor dealing with sort of life-related issues, and you sort of also found yourself dealing with sort of career and a variety of things like that. Whereas now, I think those things are probably a bit more, particularly professional athletes, you've got specific people dealing with those areas. But I think the sports psych role, has it shifted? I don't think it's shifted as much as perhaps it should have. I think there's still, and I'll probably get some critique from some psychs, but I think there's still too much of thinking about the psychologist from a clinical perspective, or more like a mental model, or a medical model rather. Which by that I mean that you have this sort of expert psychologist, and that you go and see the expert, and the expert helps you to be your best. I guess my training was in organisational psychology, and in organisational psychology, your role is to help the coach and the leader to create the environment in which success happens. So I've always seen the sports psychologist role as being more a catalyst, more a designer of the relationships, a designer and helping people to design their own sort of program, their own performance programs, etc. Now, within that, you are working with individuals on issues of anxiety and depression and so on. You are definitely working on performance improvement skills and so on. But I think ultimately, the best role of the psychologist is to work alongside coaches in helping to create the best possible environment in which performance can occur. Because as we know, you take an athlete, and if you can put them into a supportive environment and one where they feel that it's safe, but equally it's one where they feel that they can take risks and they can be challenged, they can do amazing things. If you don't have that environment, I think the psychologist often spends too much time trying to deal with the repercussions of them operating in an environment where they feel anxious, where they feel threatened, where they don't feel that they can experiment and test and sort of go to the edge of what their abilities might be. So I see the psychologist's role as something a little, maybe I don't know, perhaps not the right metaphor, but I think it's a bit more architect and a bit less builder. I think that's an important role. Yeah, but I'm waffling a bit on that one.
Yeah. No, that's very good. And I hope everyone's learned something about the role and what they actually do within a sporting team or organization, sports psychologists, because they are a very important asset to having success for players and athletes. Let's move on to our next topic, Graham, and let's talk about the importance of working on the mental skills of cricket. We're going to be talking about a lot about that in this discussion. More to come a bit later, but the mental skills or the mental side of cricket is a topic that goes unnoticed in the game of cricket. Not many speak about it or talk about it a lot. And I heard a saying once, Graham, that cricket is 90% mental, 10% skill, but players focus on the 10% rather than the 90%. And Graham, as we all know, cricket is played above the shoulders. And you mentioned this in chapter 2, why cricket is played above the shoulders in mindful cricket. And the mental skills in cricket are important skills to master within the game of cricket. It's great if you have all the skills and talent in the world, but if you don't work on the mental skills of the game, your performance will suffer. And we've seen over the game's history, many good players who were technically sound, had all the skills, but once they reached the top level or international level, they didn't perform as well. And they didn't really make the most of their potential. And they had substandard careers in cricket. The mental skills you learn from cricket, you can apply them to your everyday life, and they have benefits, as we all know. Batting, bowling, wicket-keeping, and fielding present challenges to players in form of a mental and physical challenge. So it's important to have the right mindset and mental skills to cope with these challenges during games. You also mentioned in the book, Graham, in chapter 2, why technique is overrated. You said our basic ability to bat, bowl, keep, and field doesn't change, but form comes and goes. So what cricketers do always is go down to the nets, spend hours in the nets just working on their technique, just to be more frustrated after they finish the training session, and they still haven't achieved anything. You then went on to say that the difference is mindset. Even the best players in the world have flaws in their techniques. Despite those flaws, they're still able to score runs, take wickets in all forms of the game. So, and you also say technique and talent are overrated. It is clear that confident, composed minds make runs and take wickets. So that goes back to the saying I said earlier, that cricket is 90% mental, 10% skill, but players focus on the 10% and not focusing on the important part, which is the 90%. So Graham, why is it important to work on the mental skills of the game? And do we need to change the way that coaches teach the mental skills to players within the game of cricket?
Definitely. I shouldn't try and answer it with one word. Let me approach it from this angle. Think about sports. Your listeners think about tennis. Tennis player wants to practice tennis. They practice it on a tennis court. It's the same shape, space that they're going to be competing if they go to Wimbledon or US Open or whatever. Football, they go out on the ground and they've got the same shape ground, and okay, the conditions might change. But then you've got cricket nets, and then you've got the game out in the middle. So there are not too many games right across. And I guess having worked with Olympic teams over a number of years, I can attest, having worked in so many different settings, there are not that many sports where the practice environment is so substantially different to the competitive environment, as is the case with cricket. And if you then add to that, for a batsman, one mistake, or maybe you don't even make a mistake, you're out. For the bowler, the results that you get by taking wickets are not like a shooter who lines up and shoots at the target. If they get it right, they hit the middle. As a bowler, you rarely take the wicket on the ball that you actually planned to take. It's more of more something that builds up over time. So I think what cricket and the leading coaches, I think, are now starting to do this more. I think they're starting to recognise that you can, in the nets, definitely practice technique, and that's an important part. And I don't want to underestimate. And I don't know that it's necessarily a 90%, 10%, because it's, to some extent, it's a pyramid. And if you don't have the base pyramid or base technique and so on, then you're not going to be able to go out and perform. But there comes a point where further work on technique is not going to make the difference. What's going to make the difference is whether the player can have a level of confidence to play their game, whether they understand what the limitations are of their game, whether they can read what's going on within that particular match, whether they can deal with distractions either from their own thoughts or from what's going on in the game and make the right decisions. And I think, therefore, the issue for coaches becomes, how do you create a practice environment where, at the moment, I go out to your typical cricket practice and players want to face the maximum number of deliveries they can. Well, you're only going to be facing 6 balls and over at most. You're probably going to be more likely facing 3, and your mate's going to be facing the other 3. You're going to be running in between them. If you make a mistake, you're going to be out. You're going to have a small number of gaps in which to score. You're going to have a series of problems that need to be solved. So I believe that there are a series of things that you can do from a practice perspective that better simulate the sorts of challenges that you face in matches. And then I think you can supplement that with more specific mental skills training, like mindfulness practices and so on. Whereas I think what cricket has tended to do is to sort of see this thing called sports psychology as being relaxation, visualization, and goal setting that you do at home, and then you go out in the nets, and then somehow you match those two together and go out and perform. The chances of that happening are none and zero, because the last thing you learn is the first thing that's going to fall apart under pressure. So I think the challenge for cricket, and I guess a shout out to Sean Seagard at Root Academy. I mean, I think he's one of the leading edge coaches that I see, creating genuinely high performance simulated environments for players in nets, so that there are consequences for the players, so they're subjected to pressure. So when they get into match situations, they've already practiced making decisions, starting their innings, etc. So a little bit long-winded, but I think the fundamental issue is that the practice environment of nets is different to the match situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the challenge that cricket has, isn't it? Trying to replicate match conditions in the nets.
Exactly.
That's the hardest thing to do, because it's not the same. You're not under that same pressure as you're in a test match, for example, with men around the bat. You just have nets and it's not quite the same. So it's a barrier that it's always going to be there. But how do we find ways and methods to get better and incorporate the mental skills in cricket? And I think cricket at times can be bound to traditions as well, and it's a very traditional sport, and people get, I wouldn't be doing that, that's against the coaching manual or whatever. But players and coaches are going against the coaching manual anyway. Times have changed.
Really. The modern coaches, and and that's not necessarily ages. I can think of Toot Byron. I don't think Toot wouldn't mind me saying, we're similar vintage. He's 20, 30 years ahead of his time. He's been helping Australian teams to practice and get ready to go into the subcontinent conditions and so on for years by simulating those conditions and by making sure that there are, basically, it's the conversation I've had with Greg Chappell on numerous occasions. It's like, how do you create environments in which players have got problems that they need to solve, versus just getting them into the nets? So it's quality practice over quantity. It's thinking about adaptability rather than repetition, and it's just genuinely thinking about how do you simplify the mental game. I think, and we might talk about this anyway, but I might sort of jump in. I guess the two things I always ask players to do when they think about their mindset is to what extent can they own their space. So I just look at a player and go, when I see you go out on the field as a bowler, as a batter, as a keeper, I want to look at how you own your space. So in other words, how do you look on the field? Do you look like you've got a rhythm? Do you look like you're balanced? Do you look like you're in control of what you're doing? And do you do that consistently? So what's your natural? And a Steve Smith's rhythm is completely different to a David Warner's rhythm, or to a Travis Head. And the ditto with the bowlers. And then the second thing is, when you're under pressure and you are playing, can you hold your shape? So as a bowler, can you hold your shape and your rhythm and so on? As a batter, can you hold whatever that shape is for you? And I find when I'm working with cricketers, that's a really useful starting point, because you can put them in the nets, and even things like just get them to sprint up and down a few times, and then get them to bowl some deliveries, or just get them to with some consequences around what's going to happen, and then get them to start reflecting on the extent to which they're owning space and holding shape. And then the other piece around that is, to what extent am I applying pressure, and to what extent am I absorbing pressure? So again, in the nets, if you've got bowlers and batters working together in tandem, they can be applying pressure to each other. Even just, we've done some work with Prince Alfred College here, and it's fascinating. You get I could always remember one of the conversations with with a batter and a bowler. We had a left-handed bowler who was bowling. He felt, because we were asking him, so what do you want to do to apply pressure? He said, I want to get the ball to bounce and kick away. We then went down to the batsman and said, you just faced 5 deliveries from this bowler. Where are you experiencing pressure or not experiencing pressure? He said, the first 3 deliveries were right on the spot and I couldn't get them away. That's where I felt the pressure. I don't worry about the ball that bounces up. I'm not going to nick that anyway. And as these guys got used to having more and more conversations with each other, the bowlers learned what it was that actually pressured the batsman, and the batsman learned ditto the same way around. So I think just turning psychology into those simple language. Am I owning my space? Do I look like I've got a routine and a ritual, or am I going away from it? Am I holding my shape or not? And then how do I apply pressure? How do I absorb? That, I think, gets us out of the sort of psychological mumbo jumbo that is, on one hand, not helpful, but then also probably fires up the traditionalist who goes, yeah, well, that's just not part of cricket. And I suppose my comment to sort of cricketers over the years is, I don't expect you to believe in sports psychologists, but you can't seriously tell me that sports psychology is not a fundamental part of cricket. And you'll always get a begrudging yes. So therefore, I think where psychology's failed is creating those sorts of practice environments that Root Academy and so on are now using as the sort of standard for developing players.
Absolutely. Let's move on to our next topic, Graham, and talk about having a clear mind and what are the benefits of having a clear mind when playing cricket. Now, it's one of the 4 pillars of the game mindset framework you mentioned in Mindful Cricket. Graham, it's important to have a clear mind, composure, clarity, being able to fully focus and concentrate in high-pressure moments in games of cricket. But that's easier said than done, isn't it? And it's something that players and teams struggle with, is finding a method in a way to be able to clear their mind, because in cricket, there's a lot of distractions going on. And we see teams just lose all momentum in games in high-pressure situations when they don't have a clear mind and not fully focusing or concentrating when batting, bowling, or fielding. A prime example of that I saw recently was New Zealand against England in that second test match at Trent Bridge. When England applied the pressure back onto them, they weren't composed, they didn't have a clear mind, and they were ragged, and England just, bullied them essentially. So it's very important to have a clear mind and being able, because it's the difference between winning and losing a game, really. And New Zealand lost the game there. They did, from that moment. Batsmen, bowlers, wicketkeepers, and fielders develop routines to allow them to focus, switch on or switch off, as we say in cricket, in between balls. And everyone has a different method when it comes to that. And you mentioned this in the book, Graham, the 1, 2, 3 reset your concentration, which is one method that players can use to reset their focus and concentration. But having a clear mind is important in cricket, Graham, but it's also important in everyday life. And as we said before, the mental skills you learn in cricket can definitely help you in your day-to-day life as well. You mentioned that there's 3 core principles that you mentioned that build a clear mind, and they are cultivate composure, focus in the moment, keep it simple, and adapt fast. So, Graham, how important is it to have a clear mind, and how do all of these 4 core group principles tie into having a clear mind? And what are some of the techniques that players can use to achieve a clear mind?
Yeah, I use the words clear mind, but of course your mind's not completely clear. It doesn't mean there's nothing going on, but over the years, I suppose, I don't know how many thousands of sports psychology books and research articles and so on I've read. Somebody asked me at a dinner recently, and they just said, "So sum up psychology. Like, what is performance psychology?" And I said to them, if you look at the research these days, particularly the stuff that's going on in military and other high performance areas, it is all about focus. It is, where do I pay attention? That's it. You could pretty much put anything else out of the equation. So to me, a clear mind is, can I bring a mind that is clear of the distractions and the noise that's going on around, so I can focus? Because if I can be focused on that delivery, if I can be around this moment and what's going on, then I'm going to be able to bring my best. And that's where some of the mindfulness training techniques that are useful with cricketers, but you'll find most AFL footballers, or many AFL footballers, and certainly the majority of Olympic athletes practicing mindfulness training. Mindfulness training is simply practicing bringing your attention back into the present moment without judgment. Because what we tend to do, if you think of a cricketer, is, did I play the last ball well? Did I not? What's going to happen in the future, etc., versus when I'm in the moment. So cultivating composure, focus in the moment, keep it simple, and adapt fast, probably take the adapt out for a moment. Those three kind of run together. If I can keep it simple, which means I know what my game is and I just focus on owning my space and holding my shape. If I've practiced some skills around composure, some calming, etc., and as you very rightly said, Jack, in your everyday life, it's the ability to be focused in the moment. We're doing something like this. Can I be focused on this rather than on other things that are going on now or in the future? Everybody would relate to that, whether they're a student, whether they're parents, whether they're a business person. We're at our best when we bring our attention into the present moment. And what we need to ideally learn to do, which is so damn hard, is to not bring judgment. It's the ability to accept. And boy, I've seen it so often over the years with sports people. It's not when something goes wrong that's the problem. It's the it's the wake. It's the emotional wake of that flows over. I had a bad decision from the umpire, and now I'm still distracted by it. So there is some training individuals can do day in, day out around mindfulness, and there's plenty of programs for that. And then you bring it into cricket by applying it, by understanding what your space and shape are. And just simple things, like, as I mentioned earlier, if you're gonna have somebody throw 30 balls at you in 3 minutes in the nets, you're not practicing refocusing. So the question is, at what point do you say, I'm only going to face 12 deliveries, for example, in the next 5 to 10 minutes, because that's all I'm going to face in the game. And for each one of those, I am going to go through my routine and I'm going to be totally attentive to that delivery. I'm going to have an intent around what I want to do with that, and there's going to be a consequence as to whether I make it happen or not. Then you're actually practicing focusing. So to me, that's the game mindset piece. That's that ability to clear your mind of other stuff, focus on what you need to in that moment, and you can train yourself to do that.
Absolutely. Because I do a bit of mindfulness and meditation. It's just so hard to clear your thoughts and just focus on one thing, like your breathing. I think you mentioned it in the book, centered breathing, which is one of the techniques you mentioned. And it's just so hard in our everyday lives just to sit down and just take a breath and just be able to sit still for like 5 minutes or so. It's so very hard to do. But if you keep practicing it, you probably master it, and the benefits are very beneficial for everyone.
Yeah, I think it's been described as that basic mindfulness practice. If I just sit quietly and I focus on my breathing and try to be, in a sense, be non-judgmental. Then my mind drifts. I bring it back, and what you're doing is push-ups. You're practicing, and the neuroscience very clearly shows that you change the neural pathways in your brain by doing that style of training, that you get better at reducing stress, you get better at being able to shut out distractions. I mean, a human mind is amazing. I mean, I'm just sitting in an office here at the moment. There are millions of things that I could focus on here. It could be the feel of a pen. It could be the what I can see in the screen here. It could be the thought of the client that I just saw a few minutes ago, or the one that I'm going to see in a while. It could be the conversation we're just having about the book. It might be the color of the book over there. There are so many things. The question is, how do you then harness your mind? You can't harness your mind if you can't focus your mind. And therefore, to me, the fundamental training for cricketers is that mindfulness training of learning to clear your mind. And then you have the techniques that you take out into the nets and onto the ground.
Absolutely. Let's move on to our next topic, Graham, and let's talk about the second mindful cricket pillar, which is play brave. And it's the other 4 pillars in the game mindset framework mentioned in the book. You say that play brave tackles the fear of failure and doubt which creep into our minds, causing us to give up or even self-sabotage despite knowing we can be stronger and more powerful. You also go on to mention in the book that players who play to win do better than those who play to avoid losing, and those who proactively take the game on and their opponents do better than those who avoid mistakes. And we've seen many teams in cricket, Graham, in sport in general, but in cricket, not willing to play brave or risk losing the game in order to win it and put it on the line to win a game of cricket, because there are many reasons. Teams and players have self-doubt of their abilities, don't believe in themselves. Teams go through bad patches and they just give up in tough situations and just, we can't win here, we just might as well throw in the towel. And players who are uncertain about their spot in the team don't take risk and play cautiously because they don't want to get dropped. Those are just some of the reasons I think teams are not, and players are not willing to risk winning a game of cricket. You also mentioned, Graham, is that failure is the main reason. Being seen to fail let others down. That's why people don't want to play brave cricket at times. But cricket's been a game based on stats and on performance. Of course, you'll have a fear of failure, but it's a part of the game. You just have to dust yourself off and go again. Batsmen fail to score runs, bowlers fail to take wickets, wicketkeepers and fielders fail to take catches and run out opportunities. But it's also a part of life as well. But we still have this fear of failure that we don't want to fail in something. But when a team does play brave cricket, Graham, looks to take the game on and look to risk everything to put it on the line, then the results speak for themselves. Teams and players aren't worried about the consequences that associate itself with failing. Teams don't give up in tough situations and they find a way. And it's always great to see both teams be prepared to put it on the line, risk losing the game in order to win it. And those games make the best games in cricket. And as a fan, you want to see more of them often because they make the best games. And you mentioned in the book, there's 3 core principles: create your bold vision, put it on the line, hold the tension. So, Graham, how do all of these principles contribute to achieving a play brave mindset? And why do we have this constant fear of failure?
Because our 2 great psychological fears are death and abandonment. And it's probably going to get a bit serious for a cricket podcast, but we desperately want to be approved of, liked, respected by others. It's wired into our biology, our evolutionary biology. So it's very hard for people to do things that potentially they will be then seen as being lesser by someone else. So, and this is where it really comes down to, you asked a question about mentors earlier, that there's a really important concept, I think, that's very popular in business these days called psychological safety. And psychological safety essentially is that sense of confidence that I can be myself. I can take risks. I can have a go at things, and it's not going to have negative consequences on me. I'm not going to be criticised. I'm not going to be cajoled, etc. Not to say you're not going to learn from it. So I think the first thing is that we just have, as human beings, a fundamental fear of rejection, of being seen to be lesser than we are. So number one is, how do coaches create that environment where players feel that there's more benefit out of having a go? The second is, as you said, I mean, the research shows pretty clearly that that when players try and approach success versus avoid failure, they actually do better. They're less stressed, they're more confident, they achieve better. So we know that that's the case. So a lot of it then, I think, does come down to coaches and creating team cultures in which players understand, how do I do that while holding my shape, while owning my space? So cricket's not perhaps like a lot of the football sports, certainly the Australian rules, footy and rugby, where you kind of go right to the edge of your physical capabilities, and whereas cricket, once you do that, you're going to lose your shape, you can lose that. So I think there's a lot to be said for coaches creating an environment where players feel that they can have a go. I think that's an important element. The other one I mentioned there, holding the tension, that the cricket is a game of patience, and cricket is a game where at various times, we know that, and we see it a lot. I think players have got a lot better at it with T20 now, just that ability to go, I haven't scored off the first 2 or 3 balls of the over. The tendency to then want to try and tee off and do something versus that ability to hold the tension. And I remember working with the test team back in the sort of 1990s, and it was one of the themes that the team used at that stage, which was hold the tension. So I think, to me, play brave is not bravery in the sense of the courage to go out and face a fast bowler. It's the bravery to take the psychological risk yourself, to put it on the line, which is to be confident enough to back yourself. And sometimes that means you're going to attack, and sometimes that means you're going to hold back. And the best exponent of the latter I've seen is MS Dhoni. I mean, his ability to time a run chase. There's times you're just going, come on, mate, you need to have a go at it here. And he would just get it right. Now, obviously, that comes from experience and massive skill and confidence and so on, and self-belief. But I genuinely believe if you can develop players' ability and develop teams that are more likely to play brave, and I suspect that's what McCullum's trying to do with England. I reckon we saw a little bit of it in the 2 test matches.
Say that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk, sadly, we can't have the conversation with Warney, but if Warney was here, he would just go, mate, you've got to play brave. You've got to back yourself. You're not going to die wondering. Just go and do it.
Well, he was the best at doing that. Yeah. Obviously, if you can see the poster behind me, obviously,
I can.
Great man himself, Warney. And I was lucky to meet him, as so many people were. It's just a shock that he's no longer with us. But I always remember Amazing Adelaide with Shane Warne, where he bowled from one end straight, non-stop on that last day. Yeah, that's the sort of attitude that I want to see. That's what he had. He just said, we're not going to lose this game. And everybody was like, it's going to be a draw. What are you talking about? It's like,
Well, ironically, a lot of that attitude, I mean, some of it's Shane, but a lot of it I would trace back to Rod Marsh when Rod first came into the academy.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate again to have the opportunity to work with him at that stage, and learning so much from him. And I remember he was adamant that there is a way that Australians are going to play cricket, and that's going to be an attractive, aggressive, bold way of playing cricket. We go out there in order to win the game. And then I think around that, he also created an environment of players really being very strongly encouraging of each other. And while there is always inevitably pressure within those dressing rooms, I think the Australian Test cricket team is always at its best when it's got an environment in which the players feel confident to put it on the line. And I think Cummins, I'm sure, is probably a good example of someone that I think will create an environment like that. That yes, we have very high standards, but it's that psychological safety. It's the safety to be the best you can be, to have a go at it, knowing that you learn and you get better. And I think play brave is a really important characteristic within cricket, which coaches can create cultures that enable that to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned about McCullum, and that's interesting because him and Ben Stokes are cut from the same cloth. Both of them are very aggressive.
Definitely.
And he said recently in a press conference, he said, I challenged the team to be more aggressive and more fearless than they were in the last game, heading into the third test against New Zealand. So that's his mantra, and that's his vision for the team, and let's see how it goes. And that's what their one-day side has done, really. England's one-day side. They nearly got 500 runs the other day against the Netherlands. You know, playing that fearless, bold cricket. Oh, we're going to play our shots. We get out, so be it. We get bowled out for 100 odd. That happens. But if we want to play that fearless, bold cricket, then we're going to win more games than we're going to lose. Yeah. So it's something that everyone needs to think about a bit more.
I think so. I mean, when you look at some of the research that's done around tennis and just there is such a fine when you actually look at the statistics, there is very little difference between the really top players and the next level. But the difference is what happens on the big points. And the top players win the big points. And when you look at what they do, they don't force errors into their opponents. They win the big points. They go for the line. They work their opponents into positions where they dominate those big points. So, yeah, that's the same thing. They play brave on the big points as opposed to holding back. And it's such an important characteristic to build into players. But it starts with young players feeling confident to be able to express themselves and not be careful. Be disciplined, but don't be careful.
Let's move on to our next topic, Graham. Let's talk about play clever, which is the third pillar of the framework in mindful cricket. You say that it's a rallying cry against dumb cricket, and it's bringing your cricket smarts to absorb pressure and apply pressure to shape the momentum rather than letting it shape you. Mindful, not mindless. And we see in many games, Graham, that teams play some mindless and dumb cricket and throw away golden opportunities to win games, and frustrating fans alike. Certainly frustrated me whenever Australia plays some unsmart cricket. I'm throwing things at the TV and saying, what are you doing? Yeah. Why did you play that shot? You were in, you were set, you got to start, and then you just threw it away, or you're bowling, two leg side, get over and bowl outside off, etc. But you also say that many players don't rate the skill of play clever as much as they do as playing a forward defense or working on technique. That's where we go back to what we mentioned earlier about players focusing on the technical side rather than the mindful mindset side of cricket. And you say a percentage of cricket training is dumb and mindless. I think that's pretty clear from what you said. But you say we can learn how to play clever and we can teach players how to play smarter cricket. And when teams and players play smart or play clever, the results speak for themselves. Batsmen are playing the situation, bowlers are adjusting their lines and lanes, wicket keepers and fielders are bringing that pressure onto the batsmen and causing them to feel under pressure. So it's very important. You mentioned in the book that the three principles, bat smart, bowl smart, keep and field smart. Graham, how do all of these principles contribute to achieving a play clever mindset? And how important is it for cricketers to incorporate a play clever mindset into their training?
I know I'm going to put the pressure back on the coaches again, but I suppose, maybe if I've spent more of my career in the corporate area than I have in the sport area, so perhaps if I just sort of relate to that, the best teams that I see in the corporate world are always the ones who are best at learning. So it's not that they're more motivated, it's not that they necessarily set bigger goals, but their ability to learn fast, their ability to learn from their environments, they learn from their mistakes, they are very good observers of what's going on in their world, and they just continually get better and better and better. So the sort of skill acquisition experts talk about it as the difference between kind of circling on something, which is I want to learn something, so I go out and try and make it work. Yep, I've got it, cool, versus spiraling. It's like, well, I've got it, now how do I get better? Now I've got it, how do I get better? So I think, again, it's the ability of coaches and individual players to just recognise that tactics are a critical part of the game. And that we just debrief that regularly. So the example I used earlier of getting batters and bowlers to have a conversation with each other about, well, what am I doing that's applying pressure to you? What am I doing that's relaxing the pressure? They don't understand. They don't know. You've got bowlers trying to bowl good deliveries, but the batter going, actually, that's not what's putting pressure on me. It's not being able to score, and so on. So I think it's there's not a simple, I just suddenly can switch that on and I can do it. I think it's more the culture of being really good observers of the game. And we talked about Shane Warne, and I listened to Shane on commentary. He would be constantly railing on about, we're just not playing smart cricket. We're not reading the game. There's momentum here. There's shifts in the energy of the game. Why are we not taking advantage of those? So I think it's if you're fortunate, and I had some very, very good senior players that I played with who, when I grew up, they taught me what to look for. They taught me what to look for in a batsman, and then how you bowl to that. When you're batting, what to do if you're not scoring, and how to deal with that pressure, how to read the momentum of a game. So I think it's learning. It's the ability to, in sport, in business, we talk about it as creating a loop environment rather than a linear environment. Linear environment means, well, I set my plan and then I go out and I do it, and then, well, we'll see what happens later. Versus, well, I set my plan and then I continually is what's working, what's not working. So you're looping your way through. You see it in business teams with agility that the agile teams are incredibly good at learning quickly. So to me, bat smart, bowl smart, keep smart, etc., is really about learning the game, and you learn that one game at a time, ideally with senior players helping you with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an important skill to master within the game, to be able to read the game situation, read what a batsman's doing or a bowler, what they're trying to do to get you out, or what are they trying to do to get me out as a batsman. So it's very important. And it's an important skill to learn. Graham, let's talk about the last pillar, and that's play better. And you mentioned it is a mindset of always learning and growing, and of optimism underpinned by daily habits that build reliable consistency in your game instead of highs and lows. Cricket is a game of learning and developing, and you're learning all the time, and it's important to learn from your experiences as a cricketer. But some cricketers don't even bother learning. They just get complacent, stuck in their ways. They don't want to get better. You talked about having a growth mindset and a fixed mindset, and you say that's an important topic to discuss and talk about. Yeah. And you say that talent and ability aren't fixed, but we can learn and get better by putting in the effort. You also talked about how developing good routines, rituals, and habits can have an impact on a player on game day. What they do during the week can really help them in terms of their routines on the field. And lastly, you talked about bringing optimism, and we see life through a different filter lens, either optimistic or pessimistic. And you say optimism can be developed and learned, as you mentioned in the book. So the three core principles that you mentioned in the book about play better is apply a growth mindset, be game ready, bring optimism. So, Graham, how do all of these principles contribute to achieving a play better mindset?
I probably answered a little bit of it in the previous bit. It's the ability to learn. So one of the things I guess I notice, I think we've got better over the recent years, but so much of the cricket commentary that we've heard over the years has been this guy can't play test cricket, or this woman can't play one-day cricket, or whatever, which is the antithesis of what, again, experience and research tells us. People get better. So rather than they can't do it, I prefer the not yet. They're not yet at that level. So it's such a simple fundamental. It's one of those sort of psychological concepts, growth mindset, that is so damn obvious. The question is, have I reached my limit, or can I get better? Well, the answer is, if you believe you can get better, you can get better. And that whole concept of bringing a growth mindset into a coaching program, bringing it into cricket, but I don't think cricket necessarily as a sport has a particularly good growth mindset. I think sometimes the sense that the golden years of cricket are behind us, as I think I've said in some heated conversations occasionally with ex-cricketers, we'll be saying, well, we were better in the 1980s and 90s. You go, well, you're the only sport in the world that's got worse, because every other sport, the participants are more athletic. They hit the ball faster, harder, more accurately. they perform at a far greater level. And to consider that a tennis player in the 1980s could beat a current day player is just insane. So do we really think that that's the case with cricket? So I think that bringing a growth mindset is fundamental. Secondly, optimism. Yeah, optimism isn't positive thinking. Optimism is that ability to, when bad stuff happens to you, to be able to regather again, and rather than say, well, it happened because I'm not good and I'm never going to be good and I just don't have the ability. It's like, hey, I gave it a shot and I wasn't good enough at this stage, but I can work on that and I can improve. And again, you can start to hear the voice of the coach versus the voice of the critic. So to me, play better, if you were to put to a fundamental, it's recognizing that we all have an inner critic. We also unfortunately have others around us who are going to provide that criticism at times, but we can get better. And if we can perhaps our own sort of dialogue is more about being an inner coach and giving yourself credit that I can get better and I can improve and I'm not perfect and I'm never going to be perfect, but I can move ahead. To me, that's the critical thing. So hence when you put those four pillars together, you start to then go, okay, well, if I can bring a clear mind with my focus in the present, and I'm brave enough to be able to take some risks, I'm clever enough to be able to read the game, but also humble enough to know that I'm going to keep learning and developing and I can get better, then you bring the four elements that are going to bring out the best and you're going to enjoy your cricket more. Common sense says that's the case versus, well, my mind's scrambled, I'm worried about things, I'm not really reading what's going on in the game, I'm just going to do what I've always done. And well, if I can't do it now, I'll never be able to do it. It's a very fatalistic way of approaching it. And I think cricketers can learn a lot for cricket and life by bringing those four elements together.
Absolutely. And it's just about having fun and trying to get better and enjoy the great game, which is cricket, isn't it? Isn't that right?
It is. It's not, it doesn't have to be psychology. It's good parenting. It's just thinking, well, what would you like to encourage your kids to do? Well, I'd like to think that they have a growth mindset. They believe that they can get better at anything that they set their mind at, that they see things in a more optimistic rather than a pessimistic way. And that if they want to do something, that they're going to go and prepare themselves and give themselves the best chance of doing it. Kind of sounds like common sense, doesn't it?
It does. And cricket's a great life teacher as well. It teaches us many life lessons.
Absolutely.
That we can implement in our lives. That's why it's a wonderful game. And you're always learning something new in cricket every day, even by watching or playing, or even me talking to you today.
Yeah, I agree. If you can't learn something from cricket, I think the growth mindset's not there.
Yeah, that's right. Graham, I thought to end this discussion today, there may be some up-and-coming cricketers making their way in cricket, and maybe some people interested in becoming a psychologist or getting into the sports psychology field. What advice would you give to them, and how would you go about giving advice to those type of people who want to make a career in cricket and make a career in psychology or sports psychology?
Yeah, it's a difficult one when you've got such a broad sort of span of people that you might be speaking to. I mean, I often do get emails and so on from parents saying, how do I introduce my children to sports psychology and I think the first thing I always say is exactly as we just said a moment ago, just to make sure that they're enjoying what they're doing, that it's a positive environment. The second is to ensure that they're learning, that you create an environment where you can learn and get better. And then I think, as you just said a moment ago, these are life skills. So if I'm working with a 12, 14-year-old boy or girl, then what we're doing is asking them to just be aware of exactly the things that we've talked about here, that when I bring a clear mind and I'm focused in the present moment, then I'm going to be better. If I feel like I'm going towards some sort of goal rather than away from it, then I seem to do better, etc. as well. So I think a lot of it's awareness initially. Don't make it too complicated. And in a very practical sense, think about those two things we talked about earlier, owning your space and holding your shape. I think they're the two things that you can practically do. I think if people are interested in psychology as a career, it's a pretty long haul to get registered as a psychologist. But you start it by doing well at school. You go to university, you study your way through, and so on. But the need for psychologists within the community is just massive. There are just so many roles for psychologists in everything from mental health through to organisational and neuroscience and so on. And I think what we're going to see in the next few years is just continuing breakthroughs in the neuroscience area. I think cricket's going to be facing some interesting experiences with some of the artificial intelligence and virtual reality training stuff that's going to be coming down the track in the next 5 years. But when it all boils down, I would just be hoping that people enjoy the game and that they use the game as an opportunity to develop those life skills, that clear mind, play brave, play clever, play better. I think they're pretty good life skills, and ones that I hope with my boys, it's stuff that they've been able to absorb, and ditto for anyone that we've worked with.
Absolutely, and as you said, there are important skills to learn in life, but also in cricket. And just have fun at the end of the day. That's more important. That's why I do the podcast. That's why people like me do cricket podcasts and talk about cricket. It's because we love it. And exactly. We're just having fun. That's the main thing. And I think international players at times forget that at times. It's all serious, but you forget about the fun element. It's why did you play the game in the first place? To have fun.
Yeah, I think, there's 4 elements I always try and get players to think about when they're almost 4 questions. Are you achieving things? Are you developing and growing? Are you enjoying what you're doing? And are the relationships that you have with people around you positive? And when those 4 things are in place, they tend to do well. So I think certainly with professional players, they're the 4 things I'll often come back to with them to highlight that sometimes the achievement can be so much smothering those other areas, and they lose the energy, they lose the interest.
Absolutely. Well, Graham, thank you so much for coming to join me today on the podcast to speak to me about your cricketing career, your psychology career, about mindful cricket. I highly recommend it to anyone. Please read it. It's a very good book. I learned a lot from it, and hopefully to apply that to my own cricket as well next summer, like everyone else. So, Graham, before we go, and I hope everyone got something out of this episode today and learned something as well. Graham, before we go, where can people get in touch with you or Mindful Cricket if they want to email you or have a chat? Where can they get in touch?
Straight through the website, so mindfulcricket.com. Easy place to find, and books. The books you can get on Amazon, etc., or Cricket Warehouse if you're in Australia, for example. Cricket Warehouse are avid distributors of Mindful Cricket book, amongst others as well. But they can always contact me through mindfulcricket.com.
Absolutely, we'll leave a link to that in the description of this episode. Also, before we go, also check out the other cricket videos and episodes that I did on the podcast on the mental and mindset skills of cricket. I had my cricket coach, Luke. We talked about the mental side of cricket, and also Tom Scollay from Cricket Mentoring. We talked about the mental side of the game as well. How important is it to work on them, as we did today with Graham, of course. And it's a very important skill to master and to learn, and it should not be neglected. It is an important skill to learn in cricket, and you will have success. Once again, Graham, thank you for joining me today. I hope we can have you back on to speak more about psychology, mindset. It's been very fascinating. I've enjoyed it immensely. And before we go, everyone, make sure you like, share, comment, and subscribe. Click the bell to get the latest episodes of the podcast. Like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Most of the podcast is now available on Anchor, Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, keep safe and bye for now.